Lindbergh completed the first solo transatlantic flight in May 1927 by piloting his monoplane Spirit of St. Louis from Garden City, New York to Paris, France. In 1928, Chrysler oversaw a merger of his company, Chrysler, with Dodge before beginning work on the Chrysler Building. Young chaired a committee which authored 1929's Young Plan, a program for settlement of German reparations after World War I. Gandhi was the leader of India's independence movement. In 1930, he led the Salt Satyagraha, a 240-mile march to protest the imposition of taxes on salt by the British Raj. Laval was first appointed Prime Minister of France in 1931. He was popular in the American press at the time for opposing the Hoover Moratorium, a temporary freeze on World War I debt payments that was disliked in both France and the U.S. Roosevelt won the 1932 U.S. presidential election by a landslide, defeating the incumbent Herbert Hoover. In 1933, Johnson was appointed director of the National Recovery Administration. U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave him the task of bringing industry, labor, and government together to create codes of fair practices and set prices. Roosevelt was President of the United States from 1933 to 1945. In 1934, Roosevelt's New Deal reforms were beginning to bring results. Selassie was Emperor of Ethiopia in 1935, when Italian forces invaded Ethiopia, starting the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. In 1936, Simpson's relationship with King Edward VIII of the United Kingdom led the king to abdicate the throne to marry her. Chiang was Premier of the Republic of China at the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. As Chancellor of Germany, Hitler oversaw the unification of Germany with Austria and the Sudetenland in 1938, after the Anschluss and Munich Agreement, respectively. Instead of a conventional portrait, the cover was an illustration by Rudolf von Ripper entitled, "From the Unholy Organist, a Hymn of Hate." In 1939, Stalin was General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and Premier of the Soviet Union. He oversaw the signing of a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany before invading eastern Poland. Churchill was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom during the Dunkirk evacuation and the Battle of Britain. Roosevelt was President of the United States in 1941 during the attack on Pearl Harbor, declaration of war against Japan, and resulting entry of the United States into World War II. The editors had already chosen Dumbo as their Mammal of the Year before the Pearl Harbor attack, but quickly changed it to Roosevelt. By 1942, Stalin was General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and Premier of the Soviet Union, overseeing the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. As United States Army Chief of Staff in 1943, General Marshall was instrumental in organizing U.S. actions in World War II. General Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander in Europe during 1944's Operation Overlord. Truman became President of the United States after the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1945, authorizing the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1946, Burns was United States Secretary of State during the Iran crisis of 1946, taking an increasingly hardline position in opposition to Stalin. His speech, Restatement of Policy on Germany, set the tone of future U.S. policy, repudiating the Morgenthau Plan economic policies and giving Germans hope for the future. Appointed United States Secretary of State in 1947, Marshall was the architect of the Marshall Plan. Truman was elected in his own right as President of the United States in 1948, which is considered to be one of the greatest election upsets in American history. 10-11-12, proclaimed as the man of the half-century, Churchill had led Britain and the Allies to victory in World War II. In 1949, Churchill was leader of the opposition, representing U.S. troops involved in the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. In 1951, Mossadegh was appointed Prime Minister of Iran, and expelled Western oil companies, starting the Abadan crisis. In 1952, Elizabeth acceded to the throne of the United Kingdom and the other Commonwealth realms upon the death of her father, King George VI. In 1953, Adenauer was re-elected as Chancellor of West Germany. Adenauer was overseeing the reconstruction of Germany, and the economic miracle had successfully restored relations with Germany's wartime enemies in the West and was working towards European integration. As United States Secretary of State in 1954, Dulles was architect of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Curtis was president of General Motors, GM, from 1953 to 1958. In 1955, GM sold 5 million vehicles and became the first corporation to earn $1 billion in a single year. 14. Representing Hungarian revolutionaries involved in the 1956 uprising against the Soviet-dominated government, which was put down by the Soviet Army,